This is Stanley. I'm the presenter for today's webinar. Okay, and the topic, as it actually shares on your screen, is talking about American versus British MBA programs. So this is actually a topic that was conceptualized a couple of years ago, and the reason behind this topic was quite simple. A lot of people have heard about British programs, British MBAs, Australian MBAs, or even European MBAs. But in this small little island country of Singapore, you don't really come across many American MBAs. And for many, many years, okay, I've personally spoke to a lot of graduate students like yourself who are probably evaluating various options. And a lot of mystery still surrounds this American MBA. So I thought it would be a very good platform for us today to run through some of the key differences, and also at the same time to actually share with you a bit more about the uniqueness of an American MBA program. Since that is something that not everybody comes into contact every other day. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce myself formally. Okay, this is my name, I'm Stanley. Okay, and some interesting facts about myself. I used to be an MBA director with American University, and I teach at the master's level as well as a bachelor's level. Okay, both with British universities and American universities. So I had the experience of going through teaching, okay, not only just teaching, but also speaking to interested prospective students like yourself. And that is to actually help people to make informed choices. I mean, one of the hardest thing that you can ever make, okay, is education choices, because it's the third most expensive, right after getting a property or right after actually getting your first piece of major investment. All right, so I think this is a very, very interesting opportunity for us, okay, to share with you a bit more about the US and UK MBA, okay. And next is actually a bit more about myself. Okay, in my former role, okay, I'm the head of admissions, university admissions counseling, and I'm also a certified admissions counselor. Okay, not with a local institution, but with a Hong Kong-based education group who prides themselves as Asia's leading education consultancy. So in this role, I work with a team, a dedicated team of counselors, okay, to go about helping privileged families to apply to some of the best universities in the world, whether is it the Ivy Leagues or is it the Red Brick universities in the UK. And well, leveraging a lot on my past experience, I am also actually part of a local university in Singapore, as well as an online graduate school. Okay, I'm the admissions manager and the admissions director. So I process a lot of applications. I look at a lot of candidates' profiles, so on and so forth. So I think this is actually one of the key things that's really interesting for you to know a bit more what constitutes some of the consideration factors, okay, that students make when they think about MBAs. Okay, and then of course I do a bit of research as well. I'm a chief editor of this publication in the past. And finally, on my educational front, I hold actually an MBA, okay, with distinction from American University in Pennsylvania. I also hold actually postgraduate qualifications from University of Melbourne, okay, and Western Sydney University in Australia. So I'm not just actually a typical American graduate. I have qualifications from Australia, and I also teach in British University. So that gives me a very good appreciation, okay, of what constitutes today's actually topic. Right. So other than that, on myself, I think it's important for us to set expectations. Okay, a webinar that is not organized properly can go out of hand completely. And I need to align myself with your expectations as well. So these are my expectations. Okay, I start at 2 p.m. We will take about 1.5 hours to complete. Okay, and any questions that you have, feel free to actually drop them in the chat session or during the Q&A session later on. So I will also give you some specific examples. It's not just about me saying or stating facts. It's about facts, okay? And these are observations that you can see when you actually do a Google search on the internet, right? So first question comes to mind, okay? You have so many countries in the world, 180 universities, 180 countries in the world. So which is actually the most popular graduate study destination? And why are these countries, or why is this country very, very popular in the eyes of prospective students, right? Okay, taking a reference on some of the research, okay, that I extracted from Graduate Management Admissions Council, This is a body that administers GMAT, okay? And GMAT is admissions entry exam applicable to all students who want to get into some of the top schools in the world. So based on GMAT's actually survey in 2019, okay, on screen you'll see that actually there are 2 in every 3 candidates who plans to apply to a US school. So this is not just specifically in Singapore, not just in Southeast Asia, not in just Asia, but the whole world. So you can understand why US programs itself has such a strong traction. But yet, surprisingly, in Singapore, there are not many US programs. So I will help you to demystify, okay, why US programs are really rare and hard to come by. All right. Okay, and then you will also notice in this article that they say that Western Europe is one of also the top destinations. Well, you really cannot compare one country with one small subpart of a continent, because Western Europe comprises more than just UK. It includes France, okay, Germany, so on and so forth. But when you put these 2 actually regions together, they are some of the best education options that you can find, okay, on this planet, okay. And let's look at United States, okay, in comparison between 2 years, 2017 and 2018. In 2017, you'll notice that it's 68% of people who will choose, okay, US as one of the destination. And then subsequently, in a year to come, it drops to 65%. So people tend to ask, why is there a sudden drop if you mention that US is so popular? This has a few reasons. I think one of the key reasons is Trump's immigration policy. Trump has been really coming hard, okay, on international students who wants to go into the United States for studies. So visas were an issue, okay. It was very difficult, okay, for Asians to get visas to study in US. So that accounts for part of the drop. The second reason for that was because of the fees, the charges. To study in the United States, it doesn't come cheap. Okay, later you're going to see a lot more about what are some of the costs associated with top US schools, right? So because of that, it drops from 68% to 65% just within a short window of about a year. Okay, focusing on Western Europe, you notice that interestingly on the reverse, it has increased from 37% to 42%. So it was very much at the expenses of United States, okay? And yet there were also significantly more interest in Western Europe as a country, because when you find it difficult to get to the United States for graduate studies, you look elsewhere, and Europe naturally comes to mind, especially Western Europe, okay? So these are 2 actually of the most popular regions when you're looking at any form of graduate studies. Right, okay, so let's zoom in a bit more. Okay, let's look at where you're from. If you're in Southeast Asia, okay, or you're in other parts of the world, you'll notice that they look at 40%, okay, of the shares. Okay, people look at 40% of these who will choose United States or Western Europe as a destination. Okay, and because you're in Southeast Asia, okay, focus on this box. Okay, where will you go? 45% of people will choose to go to the United States, and then 31% of them would choose to go to West Europe. Okay, so if you're from other parts of the world, you will realize that you have different preference, okay, from for universities in different parts of the world as well. So for example, to the Americans, okay, they'll prefer to stay in the United States, which is why you see a 70%, 73% here. And then for people who stay in Western Europe, they do not want to leave their countries too far or leave their loved ones. So 71% of them will stay put in where they are, okay, choosing to travel only to regional countries, right? Okay, so comes to mind a big question, United States, okay? There are so many universities in the world, so why should I even consider United States? United States, America, has 4,000 universities, okay? It is one of the country with the most number of universities in comparison to any nation, okay, in the world. Just this country has 4,000 universities. Well, if you look at Singapore, Singapore has arguably only 6 local universities. If you look at Australia, Australia has only 40, okay? If you look at UK, UK has 120 universities. So how did a country like United States, okay, accumulate 4,000 universities? Well, they were subdivided into 3 categories, okay? First category that you can see is what we call the state college or state university, Okay, the second category is what we call a private college or private university. And last is community college. These are the three main categories of universities that you see. But each of these categories are quite different. How different? State universities will be usually funded by a city or funded by a state or funded by the US government. So because the money comes from the government in terms of public funds, that's why they are deemed as a state university. So the equivalence of a state university in Singapore will be people like NUS, NTU, SMU, okay, where they receive a lot of funding from the government. All right, second category, private universities. These are universities that don't receive much federal grants, okay, or much federal aid. This will be along the lines of people that you are probably very familiar with, like for example, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. These are universities which are private and they do not have actually any form, okay, of support from the government. Lastly, community college. These are really not very common among Singaporeans or even Southeast Asians, because community college are like your junior colleges. Okay, they only confer the first 2 years of the undergraduate degree, but nothing more than that. So these three main categories, okay, a lot of people tend to ask me over the years, okay, between a state uni and a private university in US, which is more popular? It really depends. If you're really talking about the better ones, okay, it's obviously private. Okay, if you're talking about not so good ones, these are the state ones. So unlike many countries in the world, US private universities, okay, are much better ranked, much better sought after than US state universities. This is quite different. In Southeast Asia, in Singapore, in many parts of the world, state universities are always better, not for United States, okay? And United States will be quite different, okay? In UK, right, when we actually looking at UK itself, there's a difference between college and universities. So this is quite different from US, okay? So what are the college? College will be the equivalent of a junior college in Singapore, also known as actually a private college in other parts of the world. Okay, a university itself is a licensed higher education. So people once finish a 3 years degree, they will end up with a bachelor's degree, right? So there's a difference between college and university. But in United States, a college, this word terminology of college is the same as a university, right? So there are very different naming terminologies in different parts of the world. So in order to actually for us to progress further, we need to understand what are the fundamental difference between the use of terminologies. Okay, so why choose UK or US universities? Well, if you look at many statistics, look at many global university rankings, some of the best universities in the world are only found in these two countries, either United States or UK. And that would actually also allow United States to claim themselves as the #1 most popular graduate study destination. And also because they are the originator, okay, of the MBA, the modern MBA. It was started, okay, back in the United States during the Industrial Revolution. And since then, managers who want to have a scientific approach, a very systematic approach to manage people and resources, they decided to go through a structured program in an MBA, and due to increasing popularity, it spreads around the world. And that's how you get your MBAs today. But the first creator are United States, okay? And then UK holds ranking second. They are the second most popular graduate study destination after the United States, followed by third, Canada. Surprisingly, not Australia. Many people say Australia. No, Australia is not third. Okay, Australia is fourth. Fifth will be France, okay? And then sixth will be Singapore. So Singapore itself, when you compare to many educational systems, surprisingly, we have very good universities, but in terms of popularity, in terms of demand, we are not really very close yet, okay? And then these two educational systems, both the US and the UK, are world renowned because they have some of the best universities in the world, like Cambridge and Oxford. So later, we are going to look at some of the specific case studies in terms of fees for Cambridge and Oxford and do a comparison. So that brings us to a very interesting point, because I mentioned about university rankings. So why university rankings actually always are at the tip of people's fingertips. Okay, when they are always talking about, oh, the prestige, when they're talking about the standing of a university. I think it's really common because these universities itself are actually numerical comparisons and references. Okay, but I have to educate you a bit more about university rankings. In the whole world, okay, if you look at all the published literature, there are as many as 20 different university rankings. And each of the 20 university rankings are different in their own ways, using different methodologies. So, but yet, these are some of the most common ones that you see when we refer to World University Ranking. For example, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, okay, the Times Higher Education, World University Rankings, and then the QS University Rankings. These are the four main ones, where they try to study 40,000 universities around the world and try to give them numbers before they put them into tables. However, across all four World University Rankings, there is no common actually ground for comparison. So it really depends on what are parameters these publications use. Okay, and interestingly, you will notice a lot of these publications, when they actually push out rankings, university rankings, they are nothing more but newspapers. Okay, they are web-based. They are not even representing actually governments. So they are just opinions, okay, in some people's eyes, or nothing more than just surveys. So in considering university rankings, typically take them with a pinch of salt. Okay, they give you some reference, yes, but they may not tell the whole truth because you will have to go into your other specifics, okay, like their methodologies, right? So these are the more common World University Ranking. If we will zoom into US, okay, US has its own because you have 4,000 universities. It's robust enough to be compared on its own. Out of these 4,000 universities, these are the more common ones. You have the US College, okay, US News and World Report Best Colleges, which is published every year. So it's one of the very, very common university rankings that Americans refer to when they choose universities, okay? And then besides that, you have the Princeton Review, which tries to actually publish some of the best colleges, business colleges in the United States as well. So every year, they'll look at maybe about 500 colleges, puts them together, and evaluates them, okay, on different parameters. Besides that, you have other publications like Forbes, okay, or even Niche. Once again, you notice that even for US university rankings, they are very, very particular, okay, and very specific to nothing more than just newspapers as well as press publication. So they don't represent the US government's point of view as well, okay, but people still use them as a source of visual reference. Okay, moving on to UK. UK has its own. UK has much lesser universities, only about 120 of them, 130 of them, depends on which university ranking you are going to. So of these 130 universities, okay, they are put side by side, okay, either by the Times, okay, which is a newspaper, or by the Guardian, which is another newspaper, okay, or by the Complete University Guide, which is by the Independent, which is another newspaper. So three newspapers all have their own definition of which is the better universities or based on the best ranking criteria. So when you're looking at UK universities, you can always refer to any of these three for comparison. But once again, each of these rankings use different parameters. Okay, they don't have common grounds, right? Some looks at graduate satisfaction, some looks at graduate salaries, others look at actually the number of books, okay, in the campus, or the amount of research publication that's published, or how the students have been completing their programs on time. So completion rates could be another one. But all across university rankings, it depends, okay? So different university ranking have its own criteria. So before you actually make a choice based on one university ranking, my advice is look at the parameters first, okay? And many of these rankings suffer from another issue. They are only ranking undergraduate education, not postgraduate education, okay? And you're taking a postgraduate education. So don't you think you're actually comparing apple with orange to a certain extent? But these are good reference, okay? So these are actually a quick orientation about university rankings that's available, right? Without going to specifics. So let's look at actually the comparison then, okay? So we have covered the bigger environment. We look at actually what are US universities, how different they are versus the UK ones, okay? And then we talk a bit more about university rankings. Before now, we're going to zoom into specific criteria. Okay, so we're going to examine the difference between these two educational systems in terms of 4 areas. First, accreditation. Second, assessment method. Third, curriculum. And lastly, the postgraduate studies. What is the learning experience like? Okay, or how does it deviate from different countries' choice? Okay, when I put two actually comparisons side by side, American universities versus British universities, this is with no reference to any particular university. This is general observation across the board. Okay, let's focus on regional accreditations for American universities. Unlike many parts of the world, America itself programs are not directly endorsed by the US Department of Education. Instead, the US Department of Education goes through 6 regional accreditation bodies, okay, which subdivided into regions when they accredit universities that falls in a particular area or particular state. For example, New York City. Okay, New York City comes under Middle States, okay, accreditation body. Whereas if you're looking at something in the South, say Texas, okay, or Indiana, that's under the Southern Association, okay, of colleges and schools. If you look at places like California, okay, those will be under the Western Association, okay, of schools and colleges. So regional accreditation was the main mechanism used by the US Department of Education to look at the recognition of American universities. Okay. On top of that, they do subscribe to national accreditation. For example, some programs, like for example, if you decide to be a physician, okay, or a doctor, it has to be accredited at the national level. So there's different accreditation bodies at the national level for doctors and professionals. Okay, but this is quite different from regional accreditation. And then finally, you have other specialized professional accreditation at the business level, at the psychology level, or at the counseling level. These are specific to industries. These are not specific to regions. Okay, so 3 of these actually forms the main accreditation criteria, okay, for American universities. And last but not least, there's also such a thing called program accreditation. Okay, later you're going to see some of this program accreditation. People like, for example, AACSB, okay, or ACBSP, which is what you see on the screen. This accredits business programs, okay, not professional programs. Okay, so these are actually some of the very common accreditation which are being used by United States, okay, universities. And in British universities, they don't have such a complex accreditation system. It's always done by one main body, QAA, okay, Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. And this agency is a government-approved agency, okay, where they will issue actually accreditation to all the degree granting powers, okay, with all these actually recognized British university. So between the two, US and American accreditation seems to be a bit more profound, a bit more complex, but it's not really hard to understand because there are 4,000 universities, right? Okay, in UK, there's only 120 universities, so it's easier to appoint just one body to look at all of them. So between the two countries, which is better? It really depends, because what you need to ensure is that as long as either of these accreditation applies, okay, to the university you choose, that's good enough. Okay, so accreditation aside, this is the program accreditation, also the business specific accreditation. Okay, on my left of the screen, you'll see some very, very common logos, okay, that you probably come across when you're choosing universities. On the right, at the top right, these actually accreditations are probably a bit more alien to you, and you can't really blame yourself for not knowing them because these are specific to United States, okay, accreditation. So when I look at actually those logos on the left, these are always used by international universities. For example, Australia, Europe, UK, Singapore, China, India. So a lot of these universities, they may decide to get one of these logos as a quality rubber stamp, okay, to attest that MBAs or their graduate program has met certain criteria. But each of these logos, okay, means different things. Because in AACSB, that is only for research specific, okay, universities. For AMBA, okay, Association of MBAs, they only looks at MBAs. They do not look at any other business master's program, right? And then finally, EFMD, they only accredit business schools. they do not accredit programs. So each of these accreditation body has their own criteria of areas that they look into. But these are some of the most common ones that you see right now. Okay, how about those that's actually on my top right? Okay, in America, many people use AACSB, ACBSP, or IACBE. These are one of the three, okay, most common ones that they use, either one or. They will not see all three logos assembled in one program. No way, right? But on the right, it may be possible to see, okay, some of 2 or 3 of these logos in the same program or the same university. Okay, what I would like to stress upon is that when it comes to external business accreditation, it is voluntary, okay? It's taken by the business school. There is no government rule or regulation where a university must go through accreditation. So quite different from what you probably thought, because many people think that, oh, the more logos I see, that means the more recognized it's supposed to be. No, it's not about recognition. It's about quality rubber stamp. It's like in the manufacturing environment, you have ISO 9001, you have 9002. But if you don't have all these ISOs, can you still be in business? Can you still manufacture? You still can, right? So in the same context of a business school, that is accreditation. This is the ISO rubber stamp, okay, for business school, and it's voluntary, okay? So a lot of people also get confused because when they see so many logos, they tell me, oh, you know, oh, when I see so many logos, the more logos they are, these usually are highly recognized or very, very sought after, or they're probably in the top 10 or top 20. Sorry, I think you need to do your actual homework well. Having accreditation does not mean top rankings or top recognition. Employers, in fact, do not even understand what these logos are. So how did they even go about giving you recognition when they do not even understand what these logos are? Okay, these are only in the eyes of business schools. Okay, so I hope everybody can walk away understanding a bit more about what accreditation is about, make informed decisions, okay, and do not blindly choose a program because of the logos. Then I can tell you, a lot of schools will go about attracting as many logos as they want, but still maybe they are not very recognized, right? So I want you to walk away understanding that these logos do not guarantee top university rankings, okay? And then now I'm going to zoom into curriculum. So what are really the difference between American school as well as a British university? So what is it very, very different that they offer? In American school, they give you a lot of choice and freedom. Okay, in American universities itself, sometimes they give you the weirdest majors that you can ever think about. In my 20 years of higher education, I come across an American school that offers a master's in bereavement counseling. You know, bereavement, you're talking about death, and even death itself can be a master's in American school. Okay, but in British university, maybe you don't really come across that, okay, very commonly. So there's a lot of choice, a lot of options, a lot of freedom for you to decide what you would like to major in. It focuses a lot on breadth, okay? What do I mean by breadth? We are talking about the number of units and the diversity of these units as well. Syllabus, the curriculum is very, very dynamic, very, very diverse, and covers a broad spectrum of subjects, related and unrelated. What American universities believe in is to educate, okay, an all-rounded side of you, not a specialist side of you, okay? So you're trying to be a very, very much equipped generalist, okay? In American universities, you'll notice one key quite common feature. It always offers between 10 to 18 modules for any MBA programs. Okay, so why is there such a big difference? Some 10, some 15, some 16, some 18. Well, it depends on the credit points. Okay, some modules itself could have 4 credit points. Okay, some other MBAs would have 3 credit points. But across the board, this number of units are determined by the business school. Okay, so who are the ones with 18 modules? Harvard. Harvard has 18 modules. Okay, so how about 10 modules? These are usually the smaller private universities where they have only 10 modules. All right, so modules itself will be one area that you should focus on. How much do you want to study? How much can you go? Okay, and whereas on the UK side, they believe that when you take up a master's, your only option is to be highly specialized in that field of study. You can't take units out of another discipline. If you're belonging to a business school, you take all business school subjects. If you are a psychology student, you take all psychology programs, okay, all psychology modules. So they cannot allow you to mix and match. But in US schools, yes, they can. Okay, they focus a lot on that. They want to make you an expert instead of a generalist. So because of that, the contents that they cover are really very extensive. Okay, and they are very research driven. Okay, US schools are very much practical driven. That means they look at cases, they look at application. So in two actually universities, American universities will always actually advocate, you learn today, you apply tomorrow. In British universities, they say that before you apply, make sure you learn everything first. Okay, so that's the difference between the two countries universities. Okay, and in British universities, they offer something like between 7 to 8 subjects for any MBA. This is a very, very sharp contrast to the American universities. So if American universities almost offer double, coming to double or even more than double of what the British universities do. Why? Because in British universities, they believe that someone needs to go very in-depth into each of these subjects, and which is why they spend a lot of hours, okay, a lot of time trying to bring people up to speed. All right, okay, and looking at assessment, because this is very related, okay, to the syllabus. In American universities, okay, they use letters A, B, C, D, E, okay, to denote your grades, and it's always on a 4.0 GPA point system, right? Okay, the passing mark, yes, you hear me correctly, the passing mark is 80 marks out of 100. So sounds like very impossible. Some of you have probably never gone into a US program, okay, your whole life. And even scoring 80 marks when you were in high school was a challenge. So now in an American MBA, you need to score 80 to pass. Isn't that mission impossible? Well, it may seem mission impossible. But when I go into another aspect of the teaching, you are going to see very, very, very clear difference. So just bear with me. 80 marks is to get minimum GPA. You need to maintain this average GPA throughout to pass an American MBA. And distinction is only given to the best students, someone with GPA of 3.9 and above. Okay, so it's not given to anyone who just walks in the program. It's only given to the best of the best. So when you see actually MBAs with distinction, you know this student is exceptional. Okay, he has met very strict criteria to be at the top of the university cohort, right? And then attendance and participation and coursework base, okay, will be quite different. What if I tell you by today, okay, assuming that today is a real class, is a webinar, by virtue you are here today, okay, by virtue you're listening to me, Stanley, right now, I'm giving you 15 marks. Yes, you hear me correctly, okay, out of 100 marks, you're getting 15 marks, just because you're here today, right? Whether you're going to get extra marks, it depends on your participation later on, okay, in the Q&A, right? So in American programs, they set aside marks for attendance, they set aside marks for class discussion and participation. They also set aside another big portion of marks for assignments. So in an American program, USL is very fluid, it's very dynamic. People talk a lot, people discuss, people interact, people engage, not only just with the faculty, but also with their peers, because that is your formal assessment. So very, very participative, very, very cohesive, okay, form of learning, right? In the British University, okay, before I go into British University, let's finish the last part, which is the dissertation part. In American universities, there is no such thing as a dissertation, okay, before you graduate. When there's 10 units or 18 units, once you complete all, you get a GPA of 3.0, you're deemed to have completed the program. There's no need for extra work. But in the British University, okay, they will award marks for performance, okay? What do we mean by that? If you actually go into a subject and you score, unfortunately, 40 marks out of 100, in your transcript, instead of putting a letter, they're going to put 40 out of 100. And what if you are not a very, very good student? You may end up with actually not a very glamorous mark, maybe get 20 out of 100. But in a British university, they will put your actual marks, okay? So it's important for you to score as high as possible in a British program, okay? And in British universities, they use also an honor system. This honor system is not just applicable to bachelors, it's also applicable to masters. But at the master stage, their honors classification deviates, okay? If you're talking about someone with 70 marks and above, they will award a master's with distinction, okay? And if you get 60 marks and above, on average for all subjects, you'll get a master's or MBA with merit, okay? If you're only getting 50 marks, it's just a pass. So there's nothing glamorous. So they don't have a special award for you, but you pass. So you completed your program, right? So honors classification is used okay, by British universities. And in British universities today, they use a combination of coursework, which are assignments, and exams. Okay, many British universities will not move away from exams because that is what they believe in. Exam is the only way to make sure they separate between people who are really good and people who are not so good. So exams was one of the key criteria that they use to separate the good from the bad. Okay, and in all British universities, before you graduate with a master's, you need to submit a dissertation. And this is actually the extra piece of work I mentioned before you graduate from the program. So on screen, if you do a quick comparison between American universities and British universities, each of them have their own unique character, their own unique identity. So which is better? It's not easy for me to tell unless I speak to you, unless I know what are your expectations or what are your observations. So in American universities and British universities, you have two very different groups of audience, each believing that this educational system is better for them. Right? So if we look at admissions criteria-wise, in American universities, from the student's end, they have to put in more effort, okay, to meet the entry requirements. And this could be in the form of paperwork, okay, or additional documents required, like for example, your GMATs, your GREs, your TOEFLs, your IELTS. American universities are fixated about that, okay, for some reason, because they think that when you have fulfilled a very stringent exam, okay, admission exam, only then you are qualified enough to go for a very cutthroat, demanding graduate study. So in British universities, it's a lot easier, okay? Almost to the extent that everyone who gets into an MBA doesn't require an interview. So it's really easy for you to apply and secure admissions to a UK university, but it can be a lot more time consuming if you're applying to an American university, okay? And there's less documentation required, okay? Because of that, less paperwork. So you can apply for a British university without requiring actually a lot of extra effort, right, to fulfill the requirements. So in terms of admission, both universities are once again very different. American universities, applicants need to work a bit more, get the right paperwork in place. British universities itself, right, they try to simplify things, okay? All right, so let's look at teaching approach. Earlier, I mentioned a bit about assessment where American universities will give marks for attendance, okay? British universities will focus a lot on exams or research, but specifically, American universities treasure the faculty and the student engagement, which is why they give you marks for attendance. They give you marks for participation. They give you marks for case studies, okay? And they also look at actually collaborative experience. Okay, these are applications driven. They believe that when they take up an MBA program, okay, when you take up an MBA program, it's not about theoretical knowledge purely. It's also about your ability to apply research and theories into everyday life. So a lot of times when a faculty steps in the classroom or the lecture hall, they will like you, okay, to bring out your experience, to bring out your exposure, so that it could equate that to actually a real scenario or a real actually challenge. So American universities love that very, very much. And if you can actually bring out the best in your experience, American universities are probably worth considering, okay? And in American universities, students have a lot of touch points because every day it seems like you're talking to your peers, you're talking to your faculty, you're going to case studies, you're looking at presentations, so on and so forth. So American universities love that. And students will have many opportunities to learn a lot more, not only from their faculties, but also from their peers. But British universities, okay, are placing a lot of emphasis on wisdom. By virtue that you're in a British MBA, they trust that you know what it takes. You will find out whatever it takes to finish that module or that subject. So they will also like you to put on a bit of critical thinking. Okay, they adopt a very individualistic approach. If you're someone who don't really like to work with other people, okay, or you're very much an introvert, American universities are not for you. British universities seems to be a bit better because you only fend for yourself. You only care about your own performance. And that's British universities' characteristic. Okay, exams, if there's an exam, it always takes place at the end of the course. But in American universities, exams are virtually non-existent because they don't believe in exams. They believe a lot in assignments. They believe a lot in participation and cases, right? And in British universities, they, after actually go through a British system, okay, one of the key things that they advocate a lot is the systematic way of thinking. They want you to go through steps. They want you to go through methods methodologies, terminologies, so on and so forth, so that every conversation that you hold with employers or counterparts are much, much more refined. So British universities focus a lot on systematic thinking, unlike the Americans, where it's application thinking. Okay, so duration-wise, okay, very interestingly, American universities always takes 1 to 2 years for masters, and PhD takes about 5 years. British universities is a lot shorter. Usually you can get away with a program in less than 1 year, and PhD takes about 3 years. So this is just comparison in terms of time. Okay, which is better? All right. Okay, so fees-wise, okay, earlier I mentioned about the fees. Okay, American universities, they are not so straightforward. American universities depends on what type of universities. If you're looking for public universities, also known as state universities, when you take an MBA with them, it's about 30,000 per year. Okay, and if you're taking non-profit private ones, it's about 40,000. Remember earlier I mentioned that in United States, private universities are more sought after, they are much better ranked, and they are much more actually recognized, okay, in the country. So because of that, the fees are generally higher than comparison to a state uni. So very, very different. In Singapore itself, state universities are usually cheaper than private universities. But now in US, it's the reverse, the complete reverse. And among all the educational systems in the world, American universities are the most expensive. Okay, you will not be able to find a very affordable American university. Okay, and even the most affordable American university can be pretty much out of reach. Okay, from the hands of most Asians. So we're going to look at some of the cases later on. In a British university, cost depends on what program you choose, whether it's an MBA or it's a master's, it deviates. But generally, it's about £14,000 a year. Okay, if I equate that into Sing dollars, it's about 24,500 on a yearly basis, right? So here I have actually some of the very common US universities. These are the icons, okay, of American education. And why I choose them is because everybody in this section should know who's Harvard. When you look at Harvard, okay, if you study on campus in United States, in Massachusetts, okay, they will charge you, okay, 100,000 US dollars per year. And that is not just 1 year, that is 2 years program. So you have to pay 200,000 USD for a Harvard MBA, provided if you get in. For UCLA and US, okay, this is a local program, a local partnership between National University of Singapore and UCLA, University College, okay, University of California, Los Angeles. UCLA and US collaboration will set you back by 175,000, okay, for the MBA. So when you do a comparison, okay, on the British side, okay, the equivalence of Harvard, most people will say is Cambridge or Oxford. So Cambridge will cost £57,000. Okay, so even when you compare Harvard versus Cambridge, Cambridge seems to be a lot more affordable. Okay, by at least 20%. So British universities are cheaper by 20%. When you look at UCLA versus Manchester, which is also available in Singapore, they cost about 68,000. Right? US actually UCLA MBA is almost like coming to 3 times the fees of Manchester MBA. So you can actually see, even though American universities are really very sought after, one of the downside is that they are also the most expensive in the whole world. If you can afford an American university education, you can easily afford a British education. Okay, and these are very common things, factual summary of programs that I can present to you. Right? So case study. Okay, for us as an institution, we do offer 2 programs, one British, one American, and many times students ask us, okay, how do you compare between the 2? What is so different about the 2? All right. So if I give you a case study, if you look at actually Roehampton versus University of DPU, this is an overview about who they are. One is a public university, the other one is a private university. Okay, one is in London, the other one is in the city of DPU. Okay, and if I were to zoom into accreditation, okay, on the British side, okay, University of Roehampton, recognized by UK as a government university, accredited by QAA, which I mentioned earlier, and then it's also recognized by Chartered Management Institute, CMI. For University of Dubuque, okay, it's accredited by the Higher Learning Commission, and this is a regional accreditation body that is recognized by the US Department of Education. And because of this accreditation, the degree, the university that you actually complete your programs with will be acceptable for employment in all civil service, okay, around the world, right? And because it's in the first place, right, it's recognized by US Department of Education. And it's also a member of ACBSP. So we look at two actually universities that's found in the same roof. Both have different characteristics. Both have different actually comparisons as well, right? So on the duration and structure, okay, Roehampton MBA itself is 10 months, is 2 weekends every month. For DBUT is 1 year, okay, and it's 4 consecutive days per month. So we are talking about Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this is how the two programs compare side by side, okay, in terms of duration and structure. If you zoom into syllabus, curriculum, okay, what I've done here is I've highlighted for you those as in red words. These are common modules that you see in any MBA programs. It may not be just Roehampton, it may not be DBUT. When you go into any other universities, whether it's with Australia, with UK, with Europe, European business schools, or even with Singapore business schools, you will see these units again. So those in red are what we call very common units, right? Those in blue, okay, are the more interesting units which are not very, very common, not commonly found in many MBAs. So they're kind of unique to the MBA, okay? So in Roehampton, we have project management. In DBUT, we have crisis management, especially now. In the COVID situation, when you have press release, when you have to engage the public, you have to work with the government regulations, okay? Crisis management becomes an issue. So in DBUT, we talk about crisis management, okay? And we don't just stop there, we also talk about global communications and technology, which is really important. So we compare side by side between these two programs. One has slightly lesser modules, okay, only about 7 to 8 modules. On the other side, DBUT has 12 units. And this is because I mentioned Americans would like to give you scope and breadth, okay? They like to give you the breadth, teaching you a bit on everything, all right? Okay, assessment. Earlier I given you an overview, but in Roehampton it's 100% assignment based, no exams. There's a dissertation at the end, okay, of the program. In University of DBUT, you'll see 15% attendance, and I am telling you upfront, when you come to class, okay, 15% of the marks are given to you because you're physically there, okay? So when you participate a lot more, when you share your opinions, you share your issues or experiences with your peers, you also get marks along the way. This is something that is classic hallmark of American education that deviates once again from UK. And in DBUT itself, we set aside 35% for team case studies, okay? So teammates of 5 per group will be given a specific case, and they will have to go about working on the case and giving back recommendations, okay, to the case. So that will attract 35% of the marks. And finally, there will be an individual piece of assignment that accounts for 50% of the marks. Okay, so in total, both sides adds up to 100%, but it really depends on the type of learning experience you would like to go through. Okay, so which educational system is more suitable? I get asked this question a lot because people have very different consideration factors. Some people treasure this more than that. Some people like, okay, American universities only, some like Australian universities. But across the educational system, people tend to ask these 5 very common questions. Fees, okay, what are your course fees? What's your duration? Who are your faculty members? Okay, are they research-based or are they practitioners? Okay, and then assessment, how do I get assessed? How do I pass the modules or the subjects? And then finally, rankings and accreditation. Okay, these are the very 5 common questions that people look at, right? But if I take a cue, okay, from a survey that was conducted among 10,000, okay, prospective graduate students around the world, these are some of the reasons that they give. Okay, for example, reputation. Okay, look at the reputation of the educational system. And you realize that in America, the reputation of the educational system is number 1. Okay, they are very, very, very concerned. Whether is it a US education, or is it a British education, or is it a Canadian education system? Okay, and whether are they really any good? Okay, some of this actually may matter a lot more to you. For example, does it improve your chances of getting an international career? That means whether this degree or this program they completed will be sought after in a different country if I choose to migrate or if I choose to work overseas. Okay, but across the board, regardless of whichever educational systems that you choose, okay, my piece of advice, there will never be such a thing called a perfect program. Okay, My definition of a perfect program will be something that works for you, works around you, rather than works against you. Okay, what do you mean by that? Many people have told me, Stan, I want a recognized program, a recognized MBA. I want it to be a top university ranking. I want it to be short, but I'm only prepared to pay 10,000. Well, tough luck. You're not going to find that program because of the fees. The better the university is, the more expensive it is. Okay, the shorter the program, okay, the tougher your chances of getting out of the program in some ways. But in all this actually trade-offs, you're bound to find a program which fulfills most of your parameters, and that is probably the best program in my opinion. So don't actually go in search of university or MBA where it gives you the best of everything. It's not going to work. Something has to go, something has to stay, and you have to decide on what matters to you, like what these actually students have indicated. Okay, different people have different concerns, right? So with that, I've come to the end. Okay, any questions, anyone? Okay, let me just take a look very quickly at the chat session and see what are some of the questions that is being posted. Okay, so I have questions here from Justice. Justice was asking whether the dissertation on consultancy project is a group project or individual project for UK MBA. In UK universities, okay, dissertation is always individually done. Okay, it's on a one-to-one basis. Okay, there's no such thing as a group dissertation. No, right? In UK itself, it's about individual performance, like what I mentioned earlier. Not about actually the whole group. If you're looking for something that's very cohesive, very synergistic, then that's a US program. Okay, all right. Any other questions to the floor? Anyone? Anyone who has any additional questions that you would like to ask? Okay. Okay, Shirley is asking a question. How many US MBAs are there? This hand will tell you. Okay, nothing more than this. There's only 5. Okay, so who are they? Well, we have 2 under the institution. You have seen UCLA and US earlier, right? That's another one. You have actually Rutgers, okay, which is the second one. And the third one is actually Concordia University, Chicago, which is the third one. Okay, so why are actually only 5 US universities here? I've given you a quick overview earlier because they are really expensive. That's one. Second, because a lot of you are not very familiar with US programs, although they are very, very commonly sought after in other parts of the world. Okay, and third, it could also because their fees are high in the first place, right? So when it comes to Singapore, if you're only prepared to pay something like 20,000, most universities itself back home in US, they are already charging people 40,000. So you think they will want to come to Asia and then charge you half the price when they're overwhelmed with demand back home? So not likely, right? So because of that, US universities are really rare. Okay, this is like you are comparing carrying an LG phone, okay, versus an Apple phone. You see a lot of Apple phones, okay, carried by people out there. So you see in Singapore, you see a lot of Australian graduates, a lot of British grads, but you don't come across many people who carries an LG phone, okay, and this could be one of the few, okay, who holds an LG phone. Not to say that LG phones are inferior. Maybe LG phones are better. It's just that you have not come across many options in the first place. So I am one of the very rare breeds, okay, that you see where I hold an American University MBA, plus Australian qualifications, okay, plus teaching in British universities. So when you do comparison itself, I think you have better clarity, okay, and I can assure you when you go through an American university, it can be a shocker to many Singaporean students, okay, because you have grown up all the years, okay, going through a British system. So where people tell you exams are really important, grades are really important, but when you step into an American university, okay, it will not matter anymore because in the first place, there are not so much of exams, okay, and because of that, people tend to find a bit of adjustment problems in the beginning of with an American MBA, but once they're done with the first 2 months of an American MBA, they are really extremely happy because the pressure point is off. There's no such thing as exams. Now it's about collaborative learning and collaborative teamwork. Okay, so that's actually a characteristic in US MBAs. Okay, Ganesh is asking, what's the typical size of intake or class? Ganesh, maybe you would like to be a bit more specific. because I'm not too sure whether you're referring to a UK program or you're referring to a US program. Okay, but usually in a US program, okay, class attendance will be very important, right? So in US programs, sometimes their class size is small, okay, probably about 15 to 20. But in the UK MBA, because everybody is individualistic, okay, it can go from 40 to sometimes 60 students or even 100 students. So in Singapore, there are MBA programs where they take in 80 students in the same lecture hall, right? So you can forget about the close synergy or the teamwork with your peers, right? So I hope that answers Ganesh, okay, give you a bit of idea. US programs are usually smaller because of the participation requirement, whereas in the UK program, they're generally bigger, and because they don't really focus a lot on teamwork. Okay, everybody is very much to a certain extent watching out for their own. Okay, any other questions that you have? I'm seeing a question coming in from Jay. Okay, Jay is asking, is part-time MBA as good as full-time? Okay, so to answer that first question, a part-time MBA, is it as good as full-time? So it depends on the type of scenarios you are in. Okay, if you are someone who's fresh from university, that means you just finished a bachelor's. Okay, you can't find a job like now, probably you can't find a job. The only way that you could go about, okay, doing something during your free time is to take up a graduate course full-time. Okay, but the problem with this pool of students is that academically they're brighter because they just finished their universities studies not long ago. Academically they're brighter, but they are very much lacking in terms of corporate experience. And corporate experience matters a lot in an MBA. Imagine when you walk into an MBA class, when all the students are in their 40s, in their 50s, they are CEOs, CFOs, MDs, chairmen. And then here you are a young punk who has only 1 or 2 years of working experience. How are you going to value add to their learning experience? You will be a very tall challenge. So because of that, MBAs will always, especially full-time MBAs, will always instill a requirement. You must have at least 2 to 3 years of full-time work experience. Okay, and then the question, if full-time work experience is so important, then part-time MBAs, don't you think it's a bit inferior? I think it differs, okay? It really actually flips the coin in favor of part-time students because you have spent many years out there witnessing the dynamics of business activities, business actually climates changing, so on and so forth. All this experience, all these actually case studies, it could bring it back to the classroom. Okay, and because a lot of you are from different industries, that is the best point. The richness of the program lies in that. By virtue that all of you are from different industries, all of you have at least 5 to 10 years or even 15 years of corporate experience. This part-time MBA becomes a giant melting pot, okay, of corporate experience. We're talking about decades or if not centuries of working experience combined. Can you imagine how much, okay, power this actually cohort possess versus a full-time MBA where most of the students are still struggling to figure out where should I get my next job, what industry should I choose. So part-time MBAs are very valuable because they bring the corporate experience back to the classroom. Okay, and is the degree different between a part-time and full-time MBA? No, it's the same. Okay, whether you're taking a full-time MBA or you're taking a part-time MBA, the degree that's given to you at the end of the day will be still the same as if you studied back on campus, right? Okay, another question. Justice was asking, okay, my country follows US education system, okay, and our honors system has a Latin honors titles like summa cum laude. Okay, very good question, Justice. Okay, Justice. Okay, summa cum laude, magna cum laude. These are only in the bachelor stage. These are not for the master stage. These are not for the graduate stage. American universities have this cum laudes, okay, and summa cum laude is first class honors equivalent in the British university. Okay, but to get summa cum laude, your GPA must be 3.94 and above. Okay, so if you're talking about Magna, which is a second class honors equivalent in UK, that is actually second category. You must get GPA of 3.92 and above, right, out of 4 across all subjects. And then to get a cum laude, that is actually GPA of 3.9 out of 4, right? Okay, so that is undergrad. So to answer Justice, this is an MBA. MBA don't follow summa cum laudes. Okay, MBA have their own. If you get GPA of 3.9 and above, it's a distinction. MBA with distinction or a master's degree with distinction. Anything below GPA 3.9 is just a passing degree in the American context. Okay, so I hope that answers your system. Yes, US postgrad US system does use that, but they don't have cum laudes anymore. They change it to distinctions. Okay, just online themselves. All right. Okay, with just this question, any last questions? Okay, that you have. Okay. Very interestingly, I am using this actually past 1 hour or so to share with you a bit more about what I know and some of the very common questions that graduate students have asked in the last 20 years. Okay, so I hope that gives you a better idea. If there are no questions about this, okay, thank you very much. I will end off this session, but if you do have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or to reach out to Amanda, okay, and we will be able to clarify with you a lot more after this presentation. With that, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay positive, right? Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you.